You should be on the first. There we go. Easy fix. My name is Elina Gilbert, for those of you who don't know me, and I will be your host, or whatever you want to call me, for our webinar today on virtual meetings, the current reality. I know we've got a lot of folks who wanted to join us for this webinar, and rightfully so. We're definitely all trying to navigate through this kind of virtual world that we are now all stuck in. So before I get started, I am going to, let's see if I can do this. I'll let you read this while I go through some housekeeping things. So for those of you who have done our webinars before, feel free to tune out. You already have this memorized, I'm sure. For those of you who this is your first time doing a webinar, listen up. So what you should be seeing right now is a screen with a PowerPoint. That should be the bulk of your computer screen. Ignore the little bubble at the bottom. That's just me, and there's nothing to see there, but hello, it's me. The other thing is, you should see on the left side of your screen, there are some icons, and there is one with a talking bubble and a question mark. That is the bubble we want to use when you have a question. You can just click on it. You can type it in there, click enter, and it'll pop up. I will be saving all the questions for the end, so don't worry, I'm not ignoring you. I am just waiting till the end because we have a lot of material to get through before we start answering the questions. So I just want to make sure we can get through everything, and then I'll go through as many questions as I can as time allows us. Finally, you will be getting, if you want one, a CMCA credit for this. It's 1 credit because it's a 1-hour webinar. It will be emailed to you. You should have it within the next 48 hours. If you want to get it, please make sure you stay on for the entire webinar, or we are not allowed to provide the credit. If it's been a couple days and you haven't seen it come through your email, please give Grace Malley a buzz. Her direct office line is 303-991-2076. She is the wonderful person who actually sends those out and gets everything going for us so we can have these webinars. All right, if you're having any technical issues, please, I can't help you on my end. You can certainly type the questions in, and Grace will be monitoring those, and hopefully she can do something or get our IT person to do something. You can call Grace directly and ask her if she can help you. And again, her direct office number is 303-991-2076. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started because we have a lot of stuff to go through. But before we go through all that stuff, oh, our little picture's blocked out. How sad. Okay, never mind. So I do want to make sure we're all on the same page as far as what are the facts. And I think we all know this inherently, but I think it's also important to read it out loud and just acknowledge the fact that, COVID-19 is still out there. It's still a threat. We keep hearing about spikes in different states. We keep hearing about other states, starting to close down again. And so it's still out there. It's still a threat. People still have it. And so, unfortunately, I don't know why this changed, but unfortunately, there is not a whole lot we can do about that. Social distancing requirements, they're still in place in Colorado. The governor's order and the the Colorado Health Department all still have their social distancing requirements in place, and so can't get around that. We still have restrictions on the number of attendees we can have, either at indoor or outdoor events. As you probably know, it's based on the size of the venue and being able to social distance, and it's capped at either 100 or 150, depending on what you're looking at. And many are still hesitant or simply not willing to go out in public or be in large public venues. I suspect if you're not one of those individuals, you know someone who is like that. People who are in, are more susceptible, people who are already have problems with their health. Obviously, a lot of those folks are not going out. And of course, people who don't have health problems and don't want to have health problems. A lot of folks are still staying in. So with that all in mind, we also have to acknowledge the fact that business must go on, right? Association must still conduct its business. So that leaves us with, how are we going to do it? How are we going to conduct business with all this other stuff being out there? So before I get started with talking about the actual virtual meetings, I want to tell you that, I'm not an IT person. Any of you who have worked with me, you probably know I'm not an IT person. But with virtual meetings, you have to be able to at least kind of navigate through the various platforms. And so one thing I wanted to do in preparation for this webinar is I wanted to do a little bit of research online and actually see what is out there. I mean, I was expecting, 10, 15 platforms, but oh my God, there's so much more than 10 or 15 platforms. There's tons and tons and tons of them. And I'm sure some of you already know that and you're laughing at me going, oh, you're so behind the 8 ball, Elina. But honestly, I'm sure there's a lot of people who don't know that. There are so many different kinds of platforms to host virtual meetings, conferences, that sort of a thing. So I only put a few on here, and these are kind of the ones that kept popping up over and over again that seem to be the most popular. But even out of these, I don't know half of them. I knew Zoom, I knew WebEx, GoToMeetings, and Skype. But what is this Easy Talks, Zoho Meeting, Join Me? Like I said, I'm sure some of you know this inside and out, but I certainly didn't. And for all the others who are listening in and you didn't know about that, there's a lot of resources out there. So I encourage everyone to do some research for your communities and see maybe there's something out there that works better than other things for you. So just know there's a lot out there. All right. The next thing I want to address is the question of, is a virtual meeting still a meeting? I've actually had this come up with a few associations, and if I'm probably not the only one, and I suspect you guys may have had that issue come up as well. I've had boards, I've had homeowners, and even some managers questioning of, well, if we do this virtually, is it still technically a meeting, or is it something else? Is it an action outside of a meeting? I mean, what do we treat it as? And so I think the first thing that we have to do when we are trying to figure this out is you got to look at the plain definition of the word meeting. And I looked at the American Heritage Dictionary, I looked at Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and they're pretty similar in that it says assembly or gathering, process of coming together, assembly for common purpose. So when I first read that, I thought, oh, it does have to be physical. But then I thought about it and I realized that why? None of these definitions have the word physical in there. An assembly doesn't have to be physically. We can assemble virtually. We can gather virtually. We can come together virtually. So where is this requirement that we all physically have to be in the same room? There isn't one. And so I think anytime you do a virtual meeting, you do need to treat it as a meeting, which means it is subject to all the restrictions and all the requirements of the various statutes and our governing documents that deal with meetings. So don't treat this as an action outside of a meeting. Treat it as an actual meeting. All right. So kind of the first thing I want to address is virtual board meetings. And then I want to get into virtual homeowner meetings because those are a little more complex. And then I just want to talk about a couple specialized meetings that have their own issues. So let's start with the easier one. Let's start with the virtual board meetings. So this what's required should really say what's required and is it allowed. Because the Nonprofit Act has some pretty straightforward language. It says a director can participate in meetings using any means of communication by which all directors participating can hear each other during the meeting. So there is no requirement, as you can see, to see each other. And honestly, sometimes it's better not to see each other, but we do have to hear each other. And the statute goes on to say that if you can do this, you are considered to be present at the meeting. However, it's subject to limitations that may be contained in your bylaws. So, again, sometimes people question, well, what authority do you have, board, to have this virtual meeting? Well, the answer is the nonprofit. Kiowa doesn't speak to it, and the nonprofit says we can do it by any means, as long as we can all hear each other. And we're doing one thing better. We're actually seeing each other too. So that's one thing. But then the next thing is a couple of requirements in Kiowa. Certainly Kiowa has more requirements than just this. The reason I am putting these specific requirements in here is because we're going to need to talk about them with respect to virtual meetings and how that works. So meetings must be open to homeowners. You guys know that. Owners must be afforded an opportunity to comment on an issue before the board formally votes. Okay? So keep those in the back of your mind, because we're going to talk about things that you need to consider and things you need to address. So first thing you got to consider are your governing documents, because as I mentioned earlier, the nonprofit says, hey, this is subject to any additional restrictions you might have in your bylaws. I encourage you not just to look at your bylaws, but also your declaration and your articles of incorporation, because if you have some additional restrictions in there, it would behoove the association to actually comply with those, even though they're not in the bylaws. But you got to look at your documents, and you got to see if there's anything else in there with respect to holding virtual meetings. So if you have additional requirements in your documents, you are going to be required to comply with those. For the most part, I don't typically see virtual meeting requirements, especially if you've got older documents before virtual meetings were even a thing. You're probably not going to see anything, but the newer documents you may. So don't just go off the statute and say, we're going to do this. Look in your documents. Okay. The next thing is, will the association send notice of the board meeting to its owners? And if so, how are you going to do it? So with this question, I think the answer should be no different than the answer to a physical meeting. Remember, notice of board meetings is not required by Colorado law to homeowners. So you've never had to send out notice to homeowners that a board meeting is about to take place, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't or it's not a good idea to do it. So to the extent I think we have a board that has never in the past sent out notice, I don't know that you would do anything different with a virtual meeting. If you haven't done it, you don't want to start doing it, nothing's going to force you to do it. If in the past you have provided some kind of notice to homeowners, for example, you've posted notice on the website, you've put something up on a bulletin board, however, you've sent a blast email, however you've done it, I think you can also continue in the same manner with a virtual meeting, except that you're going to have to provide a link or instructions to how to get in the meeting and how to join, since it's not a physical meeting. Next, how will the association make agendas available? So that is actually also a requirement that agendas have to be made available. So if a homeowner wants an agenda, they are entitled to get one. So how will you make those available when it's a virtual board meeting? Do you email them out? Do you post them on the website? Do you just see if anyone shows up to this virtual meeting and then do a share screen where people can see the agenda? There's lots of options. But again, I don't think this has to be a whole lot different than how you would do it at a physical meeting. Because if in the past you've posted the agenda on the website, you can continue to do that. If you have posted a copy of the agenda at the bulletin board, you can continue to do that. The only thing that really might be different is if you've not posted agendas, but you've just given them out to homeowners when they show up at the meeting. So obviously, with a virtual meeting, you're not just going to be able to hand something to the homeowners as they show up, but you can either email it to them when they sign on. You can do a share screen. So there, you can have other options of making it available. But the key is you need to know ahead of time how you're going to do that, because you don't want to scramble at the last minute. So speaking of knowing ahead of time, I'm just going to quickly deviate and say that I hope most of your communities have adopted some sort of a virtual meeting policy. To the extent you're holding virtual meetings, and I think it's almost impossible not to, you should have a policy in place that spells all these various things out. So A, you're never kind of playing it by ear. B, you're extremely consistent with how you hold virtual meetings, especially if we're going to have to continue to do this in the future, okay? And the way things are going, we probably will. So again, if you have a policy and it spells out, everything we're going to talk about should be spelled out in a policy so that, again, it makes the community manager's life easier because you're following the same process every time and it's already spelled out and you know exactly what you're doing for every single virtual meeting. It makes the board's life easier because it also will know ahead of time what's going to happen and how the meetings will be conducted. And it ensures that you are treating all the meetings in the same manner across the board because all you're doing is following the steps in your policy. So if you don't have a policy for your communities as of yet, I really, really encourage boards to consider it and to contact whoever their legal counsel is about getting one drafted because it really, really, I think, is important to have it and keep things consistent. All right, let's keep talking. So, more things on board meetings. How will the association allow owners to comment prior to the vote? So remember, that was a requirement in Kiowa. We have to allow homeowners to comment before the board formally votes. And the way Kiowa actually is written, it says you have to allow a reasonable number of owners on both sides of the issue to comment before the vote. So if you've got 40 homeowners in attendance and everyone's hot and bothered about something that the board's about to vote on, you don't have to allow all 40 to speak, but a reasonable number, whatever the board determines that to be, and you have to allow it on both sides of the issue. So with a virtual meeting, is that any different? Well, the only thing I think that's different is we are in a virtual room together, and we should have someone, usually it's the host, who has control over the muting and unmuting function, as well as the ability to disconnect people and to share the screen and do a lot of different things. So on some level, a virtual meeting is almost easier when it comes to homeowner comment because you give someone 60 seconds to comment and they refuse to shut up after 60 seconds, which, as you know, happens quite often. Someone's going to push that mute button and move on to the next person. So I think on some level, it really is easier in virtual meetings to control these comments from the homeowners, okay? How do we know if someone wants to comment? Well, I know some of you do a sign-up list. Check this box if you want to comment, for board meetings. And then the board president will read off and say, okay, Joe checked the box, Joe wants to comment. Can't really do that, I think, with a virtual meeting unless you have some kind of a platform that allows homeowners to check something that says, I want to speak. So what's another option? So you could just do show of hands if you want to. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. If not, you should all, most of these platforms have chat boxes, have somebody type in the chat box, hey, I want to speak at the board meeting. Can you let me speak? So again, there's ways of doing it. You just got to know ahead of time how you're going to do it, okay? How will the meeting be run? Well, there's two aspects, I think, with a virtual meeting as to how it will be run. Someone's got to chair the meeting, whether it's the board president or the community manager. Someone's going to be in charge of running that meeting. But we kind of have the second aspect, which is the virtual part. Someone's got to be looking out for the virtual issues, right? We got to make sure we can see everyone. We got to make sure nobody's talking out of turn or we mute them. We got to make sure that adequate screens are being shared if we're doing that. So again, two aspects, probably difficult for one person to do both. If I'm talking and I'm running the meeting, I think it might be a little difficult, but I am IT challenged, so maybe this isn't applicable to the rest of you, but I'm not going to be able to also figure out who to mute and what to click on and you know, what needs to happen with a share screen. So again, plan ahead. Who's going to do each of these things? And if it's the same person, hopefully they have more IT skills than I do, because Lord knows I don't have any. All right. Oh, and this is our little comic relief. Take a deep breath. All right. And you know what? I think this is true for most people. I know I do it. I'm not creepy, but I do it. All right. Let's move on. I'm moving on to membership meetings now. And this is really where we start to get into some pretty specific and I think complicated issues. Because membership meetings are, you know, anything but easy when it comes to having physical meetings, but now virtual meetings, and if you have a large community with like 200 homes or 1,000 homes, your master community, how on earth are you going to do that? So let's talk about what the law says first. So the Nonprofit Act has almost identical language when it comes to not so much virtual, but attending a homeowner meeting. It says basically any homeowner can participate in a meeting using any means of communication, but which members participating may hear each other during the meeting. And of course, it goes on to say that if you are doing this, you are considered to be present at the meeting, and we are still subject to limitations in our bylaws, and I would add other governing documents, such as your declaration and your articles. Okay, so there's our authority for holding these virtual membership meetings, because some homeowners and board members have tried challenging them, saying you don't have authority to do this. So unless we have limitations in our bylaws saying, hey, you can't do a virtual meeting, I believe that this statutory language in the Nonprofit Act does authorize us to have these meetings. And again, there's nothing that says we have to see each other. We just have to be able to hear each other. Of course, you and I know that it's certainly easier for us to conduct business when we can see each other and not just hear each other. All right, Kiowa. Again, not talking about all the Kiowa requirements when it comes to homeowner meetings. I'm just mentioning a couple of them because it's important for the purpose of figuring out virtual meetings and what we do with these things. All right, so you guys know this, 10 to 50 days notice, snail mail or hand delivery. There's other things you also have to do. But then what does the notice have to contain? A time, a place, it's underlined because it's important, and the agenda items. And then the last thing is you gotta allow proxies. So you can't have a meeting where you say we're not accepting proxies. All right, so now that is going to lead us to the various considerations that boards and community managers really need to think about when it comes to holding these virtual membership meetings. So obviously the first one is contents of your governing documents. Do you have any restrictions in there or additional requirements that you need to follow? If so, you're going to have to do it, whatever it is. All right, so here's the next thing. The place, a meeting place is required to be in the notice. Now we can argue and say a place can be a virtual location, right? We can say that. Would a judge agree with us? I'm not sure, because the term place somewhat implies a physical location. And if we really want to be safe about holding a virtual membership meeting, we should provide an actual physical location in the notice. However, you can specify that attendance may only be virtual. In other words, this is the physical location, and maybe we have like one person there with their laptop, but you cannot attend physically. You've got to log in virtually. So that way, we've complied with the meeting notice requirement if place truly means a physical place, and we're still conducting the meeting virtually. Okay, so that is definitely something that needs to be addressed in your virtual meeting policy, because I don't think you want to be last minute about this, and you don't want to be inconsistent. All right, so we've sent the notice out, right? The notice is going to be sent out in exactly the same way that you would send out a physical meeting notice. It's going to have the date, the time, the place, right? The items, if it's an annual meeting or a special meeting, the items are going to be discussed and voted on. And then it's also going to have instructions, in this case, for how a member can log in and attend the meeting. So that's going to be the one additional thing when it comes to our meeting notice. We got to tell them how they can log in. All right. So once, you know, everyone's logged in, we're at the meeting. Well, I shouldn't say logged in. Once the meeting starts or we start check-in, we got to figure out how check-in is going to work. As you know, we do need to know how many homeowners are represented. We need to still establish quorum. We still need a record of attendance in case there are issues down the road and someone's questioning whether or not quorum was reached. So the question is, how do you take attendance? Again, the easiest thing to do is roll call. It's not the quickest, but it's certainly the easiest, unless you have a virtual meeting platform that allows people to check in. Now, I know there are some platforms that can do that because I've talked with some of you guys and you've told me that you have found these platforms and homeowners can actually check in. They're given an ID, you know, they check in and then it marks them as being there. So if you can do that, obviously that's so much easier than a roll call. But if your platform doesn't have the capability to do it, or you don't know how to trigger that capability, you're going to have to do roll call. And if that means you call out each individual household, all 200 of them, then unfortunately, that's what it means. So for the process of checking people in, you obviously would want to start check-in before the meeting. And not just 5 minutes before the meeting. I mean, you guys do this at your physical meetings too. You'll say check-in starts an hour or a half hour before the meeting, and you hope that a whole bunch of people show up early so we don't have to start the meeting late. But I think you have to be ready for that when it comes to virtual meetings. All right. Now, kind of the hard part, handling proxies and submitting of proxies. So remember I said just a few minutes ago that you cannot prohibit proxies. You have to allow proxies. You have to allow them up to the meeting start. So you can't require homeowners to turn in their proxies a day before the meeting. I know a lot of communities do this, but that is in violation of Kiowa. Kiowa allows you to attend a meeting using a proxy. And unless you're going to require for a physical meeting people to be there 24 hours before the meeting starts, you cannot require them to be there by proxy 24 hours before the meeting starts, okay? Because they're considered to be there when they're with a proxy, and you cannot take that right away from them. So what do we do with a virtual membership meeting with proxies? So one thing is, and I always get surprised looks, and I can't see any of you, but I'm sure some of you will have this. Associations are not required to provide proxy forms. We're just not. But we do it. We do it most of the time because it actually makes our life easier, because then at least we know we have the correct form, we know it's going to be done right, and we do it to make homeowners' lives easier as well. However, If you send out a meeting notice and there's no proxy form attached, that's okay. That's not against the law. However, then, if I'm a homeowner, I get to make my own makeshift proxy if I want to submit one. So you might get, photos of napkins with handwritten notes on there, and you're going to have to try to weed through that. I have had associations say we're not going to provide proxy forms in the hope that they will not have to deal with proxies and that homeowners will realize that they can still create their own proxies. I've seen it backfire. I've seen it work. If you got enough homeowners in the community who get upset about the fact that the association has not provided them with a proxy form when it has all prior years, and they start creating their own, oh my gosh, it could be a complete nightmare. So just kind of be careful what you ask for and give some serious thought as to whether or not it makes sense to provide or not provide proxy forms when it comes to virtual meetings. All right, so how are the proxies going to be delivered? Can they be scanned and emailed to the community manager or to the board president? Can they be dropped off at a physical location? So like I said, we might have a physical location for the meeting, even though people aren't going to physically go there. But is there somewhere that I as a homeowner can go to drop off my proxy? Can I go to the management company office and drop it off at the front desk there? Can I go to someone like board president's home and drop it off there? So assuming you get a policy in place, all of that should be spelled out. Where is it acceptable to drop off these proxies? And remember, since we have to allow them up until the start of the meeting, it gets a little bit confusing as to how we can allow someone to drop off a proxy up until the very beginning of the meeting when it's not a physical meeting. So on some level, it's really up to that individual homeowner to make sure they get it to the appropriate person in time. However, there must be a method specified by which they really can deliver it. So if you're a community manager and you're doing this virtual meeting, you're at your office, you're going to be running it from there, can a homeowner stop by your office up until 6 p.m. when the meeting starts and drop off that proxy? Again, things that have to be thought about and planned out way, way ahead of time before you send that notice out. And then preservation of proxies. So proxies and ballots have to be preserved for at least 1 year after the meeting. So keep in mind that even if you're getting these proxies scanned to you and emailed over to you, you're still going to be saving those and into the system, and you're going to have to keep them in the system for at least 1 year, so that if somebody wants to look at them, we're letting them. All right. Oh, and now the fun part. Oh, by the way, if you guys are laughing at the picture, I'm very happy because you have to have seen the movie. All right. Voting process. This is another one that is confusing. Well, part of it is confusing. As you know, I'm just going to focus on elections right now. So with elections, if we have an uncontested election, that's easy. We got 3 people running for 3 open board positions, right? And that's it. Nobody from the floor. You have to allow nominations from the floor. So again, with a virtual meeting, anybody want to throw in their candidacy from the floor? And the people have to have a way of being able to do this, whether it's a raise of hand, whether it's they have to send something in the text messaging section. They have to have a way of being able to do that. But assuming we got 3 people, 3 positions, they're on by acclamation. We don't have to vote. We could do a show of hands if we really wanted to, but do we? Because again, they get on by acclamation. And so that's kind of the easiest thing we can do. And then how do you record the vote? You would record it the same way as you would at a physical meeting. The election was uncontested. These 3 people got on the board by acclamation. That's all you got to do. All right. But now what happens if you have a contested election? And that is really problematic. A contested election is more people running than open positions. And under Kiowa, we have to use secret ballots. So I guess one thing to consider is before we even vote, do we allow the candidates to speak? So someone going to be controlling, you know, the mute button on the other side saying you each have 3 minutes, or we let them talk as long as they want. Again, you just need to figure that out ahead of time. But when it comes to secret ballots, most communities, the platforms they use, either do not have the mechanism to create secret ballots for homeowners to vote anonymously, or if they do, it is super duper expensive or something. I've talked with some managers that have told me they do use that process, and they do have some platforms that allow for it. So certainly it's out there. But I think most communities don't have that capability right now. And so how do you do a secret ballot at a virtual meeting? You really can't if the platform doesn't allow you to do it. So what happens? Well, the only thing you can really do at that point is, again, you can allow the people to speak. You can ask if there's nominations from the board, from the floor, and then you basically say, stop, okay, thank you. We will be sending out mail ballots after the meeting. So essentially, you're going to be voting outside of the meeting to elect the board. You're going to have to use the old double envelope system. You are going to have to put in the candidates, anyone who nominated themselves from the floor, and you are going to have to also leave some blanks for write-in candidates, because this is not a vote at the meeting. This is a whole separate action outside of a meeting, which means we have to follow the statutory requirements for action outside of a meeting for a mail ballot. So it definitely adds more time. It's going to add more complexity. It's going to add more costs, because you're going to have to do all this stuff, and you're going to have to pay, you know, your management company to make all these copies and to send all this out. And depending on the size of the community, it could be a lot of money. But again, you know, there's really no other way to be able to do a secret ballot without a platform, a virtual platform that allows you to do that. And last but not least, preservation of ballots, whether you vote outside of a meeting by a mail ballot, or you have a capability to do a secret ballot through the platform, you still have to preserve the ballots for at least 1 year. So you need to make sure that however you do it, we can print out a document with a ballot that actually has candidates marked. So that's one question for the virtual meeting platforms, is if people are just registering their number and clicking, do we truly have a ballot? Or can we print something out, a document for each individual or each unit that has voted? All things that need to be addressed. All right, minutes. What do we need to consider? Who takes minutes? Format and preservation of same. I don't think there's a whole lot of differences with respect to taking meeting minutes at a virtual meeting versus a physical meeting. The information still has to be the same. Did we get quorum? We have to talk about motions, seconds, votes. What was the outcome of the election if we had one, right? If there were other things that were being voted on, kind of what was that? What are the general discussion items during open forum? Things like that. I don't think the format really needs to be much different than it would be at a physical meeting. Okay. Who controls the virtual aspect of the meeting? So it's exactly the same thing as the board member meetings. Who controls the virtual aspect? Who's going to mute people that are out of order? Who's going to monitor the time? And who has the floor and the chat features and the screen sharing? Again, you got to have someone in place who's going to be responsible for all this stuff. And that person should be cherry-picked ahead of time. And my guess is it's not going to be the same person that's actually running the meeting. All right. Okay, I want to talk about a couple of different meetings that are still homeowner meetings, but that also bring up additional issues that we haven't really discussed. So, budget ratification meetings. For most of our communities, we're going through the Kiowa budget process, which means we don't have an affirmative vote. We just have to make sure we don't have homeowners vetoing the budget. And they don't have quorum requirement for the budget ratification meeting. So if you want to do a budget ratification meeting virtually, how do you do it? Oh, and by the way, I have had questions, and I know these come up, about we don't want to do a virtual budget ratification meeting. Can we just do a mail ballot vote on it and call it good? Well, the answer is no. Kiowa requires a meeting. Now, you can choose not to vote or ratify at the meeting, but you got to have a meeting to talk about the budget. So that is a requirement under Kiowa, and you're not going to be able to bypass that. But then I always say, if you're having the meeting, why not just do the ratification there? All right, so you're going to call this budget ratification meeting. You're going to give homeowners, obviously, all the sign-in information, and you're still going to have to deal with taking attendance and checking people in. However, when you are done with all of that, A, you don't have to verify that a quorum is present, so you can take that out of the picture. And in most cases, you're going to need a majority of all the homeowners to veto. Okay, it's going to be that or something higher. So if you don't have a majority of all your homeowners present at the meeting, I think you treat it exactly the same way as a physical meeting and say, we don't have enough people here to veto the budget. It is automatically ratified. The meeting is adjourned, but we will stick around to answer any questions the homeowners might have. Okay. So I don't think there's a whole lot of difference with a budget ratification meeting. If you do have enough people there to veto, it does not have to be a secret ballot vote. So you can simply ask the homeowners, and again, it's not going to be quicker, obviously, but you can ask them how many are here to veto, how many are in favor of vetoing the budget. And then you can kind of play it by ear based on, is there enough homeowners here that we can actually do a show of hands and I can, write it down for the minutes or not, or do we need to do a vote outside of a meeting? All right. Okay, recall meetings. I don't know if you guys are noticing it. I suspect you all are, but people are getting really mean. They're just getting mean. People are increasingly unhappy. I suspect it's not just because of their HOAs. I think there's just a lot of stuff going on in the world right now. And people are generally angry. But we're seeing it a lot in the HOA realm because, let's face it, boards are easy targets. Managers are easy targets, right? I can be pissed off at my board because they're doing something wrong. I can be pissed off at the manager because they didn't call me back within 20 minutes when I left them a message. So I'm actually seeing a lot of recall meetings right now. I don't know if you guys are, but for me personally, in the communities I work with, I've got like 3 in just the next 2 weeks. So that's a lot. So the question is, what do we do with these recall meeting requests? If we can't have a physical meeting, how do we do it virtually? So the answer is, you can do it virtually. It's still going to fall under the homeowner meeting issue that we just talked about. You're still going to have to do, the notice. You're still going to have to give the login information. You're still going to need to be able to take attendance and figure out if there's quorum. Obviously, if there's no quorum, you can just dismiss the meeting. If you do have quorum, do you have, depending on what the meeting requirements are there enough people there to remove the board? Now, the recall vote itself does not have to be a secret ballot. So if people have a problem with voting openly and whether or not to recall the board, that's really on them. They're not entitled to a secret ballot when it comes to recall meetings. So I think you can do a show of hands or roll call as far as counting the votes to remove versus not to remove, and do it that way. Again, it's not going to be quicker, it's not going to be easier, but you can do it that way. If you have the platform with a mechanism to vote, again, do that. So we can do the recall vote at the meeting. What if the board gets recalled, but now we have to vote in a new board? Okay, we're back to the issue of, do we need to use a secret ballot? Because we've got a board of 3, they all get recalled, and now we have 3 owners in the audience who want to run for the board, and they're the only ones. Great, that's easy. What if there's like 6 people out there who want to run for the board? And we do not have a mechanism by which to do a secret ballot electronically. Well, you might think, okay, well, fine, we will do we'll have the meeting, and then we will send out the secret ballot election just like we would with an annual meeting. So I've had boards that wanted to do this only to be stopped by the homeowners claiming that, no, that's not fair. You can't do that because only the owners who went to the meeting should be allowed to vote on the election of the replacement board. Because if we had a physical meeting, that's how it would have worked. Okay? And so that stumps some of the associations, some of the boards. Like, well, I guess that's true. What do we do with that? So a couple of things to think about in those situations is, one, there is nothing in any statute that specifically says that you cannot do the replacement election after the special recall meeting, okay? And because it's an action, because it's a mail ballot issue, it's not part of the meeting anymore. It's a whole separate thing, and it does have to go to every single homeowner. We can't just send the election to just the homeowners who were present at the meeting. But I don't think that's in violation of the law because, like I said, there's nothing in statute that says we can't do it this way. So I think it's more of a political issue that tends to come up over and over again. And with virtual meetings, you know, we're just starting down this road of really utilizing them. And I think we're going to see a lot of changes coming down the pike. We're going to see some, you know, I think we might see some changes in the law. I think we're going to see some more platforms out there that are more user-friendly for people like me, at least, with respect to being able to hold these meetings, being able to vote, being able to retain ballots. So that's all coming. That's my prediction anyway. I think that's all coming, and I think we're going to see it. But for now, we're kind of stuck with what we got. So we got to make the best of it. And and again, I can't speak highly enough for getting a policy in place because that really will help you for your future virtual meetings. This is so true. Now, I am at the end of my materials, and we got about 10 minutes left, which is great. And while you enjoy the dancing, well, they're supposed to be dancing, the dancing pig and the dancing chicken. I don't think they're dancing. All right. I'm going to start at the bottom of all these questions and just go ahead and read them. I'm only in the question mark category. I see there's stuff in the other bubble as well. If I can get to it, I will, but I'm going to start with the question marks. Oh, sorry. All right. What if we have a member with no computer access for the annual meeting? That is a great, great question, and no doubt you will run into it. I think then that person, I mean, if the board, if the association has a mechanism by which to allow that person to utilize someone else's computer, or you have an extra laptop, or something, I think that would be great to try and help those individuals. But ultimately, I do not see that as something the association absolutely has to do by law. Certainly, I'm sure someone could argue that. But if they don't have a computer, again, I would really try to do your best to accommodate them and get them a computer, or have like some sort of a central viewing area. I don't know. But there's usually a mechanism to at least phone in to these virtual meetings if you don't have a computer. And I have seen that work a lot. So I think, make sure your platforms do allow the phone participation, because everyone, I would hope, has a phone. Okay. Do we need to create a specific policy just to address virtual meetings, or should virtual meetings be included in another policy? Well, all associations have to have a conduct of meetings policy, so that covers the bulk of it. My personal preference is to just do a supplemental virtual meeting policy that basically says, hey, we still got to follow everything in the conduct of meetings policy, but if we're conducting a virtual meeting, these additional things are also going to take place. You can certainly not do it that way and take your conduct of meetings policy and put all that stuff in there if you wanted to. I just think it's cleaner to do it as a kind of supplemental policy. Why take roll call if we can see they are on the line for pickup as well as draw? Oh, sorry, I just read two questions. Why take roll call if we can see they are on the line by phone or video? So if you know what everyone looks like by face and you can see them by video, that's fine. I suspect with larger communities, you probably don't know what everyone looks like. If they are on the line or by phone, obviously they're still going to have to identify themselves, because we want to make sure that I can, for example, call and I put my phone on speaker and I got my neighbors over and we're here together. So you won't see my neighbors on the actual phone line, right? You'd have to ask who's on this line. So if my neighbors are on there, they're going to have to say this property is also on this line. So that's why you do probably need to take roll call or have some sort of mechanism in place to identify who is at the meeting. Can we leave proxies available at a home for pickup as well as drop off? Yeah, absolutely. If you've got someone who is willing to donate their home for that way, absolutely. And that's just another mechanism then that you would be able to implement to help owners be able to get proxies and drop them off. Yes. Proxies. Are you able to allow physical delivery of proxies up to 2 business days before an annual meeting and allow to receive via email up to the meeting? Yes, as long as there is a mechanism by which to deliver proxies up until the meeting starts, then you can have, if you can deliver them at least 2 days before the meeting, you can use this mechanism. If you need to deliver them, within the 2 days, then use this other mechanism. You can absolutely do that as long as there is a way. Would an email vote with emails received and counted by the secretary not be considered secret? That could theoretically be done during the meeting. Well, if the secretary can see who voted how, it's not secret because someone now knows. A secret would mean secret to everybody, and not just secret to everybody but the counter. Secret is secret. So unfortunately, you couldn't do it that way unless, like I said, the platform allows the secretary to see the votes, but not who cast them. For voting, can't we use the voting feature on our Town Square application? We have 100% sign up on the app. Okay, so this is where my lack of knowledge in IT is going to come through, because I have no idea what the Town Square application is and what it allows. I don't know what the voting feature allows. If it allows secret voting, then yeah, absolutely. If it falls under all the things we talked about, as far as being able to print out a ballot, absolutely use it. I just am not familiar with that specific feature. When homeowners wish to speak at a board meeting prior to a vote, can it be on any topic being voted upon, a particular vendor, architectural requests, certainly policy creations and adoptions? Are there any examples of items that cannot be commented on? So the answer is no. Kiowa has a flat-out requirement that prior to the board taking a vote, and it doesn't say these certain things, homeowners are entitled to comment. So basically, before any vote is taken, you have to look at the homeowners and say, hey, anybody got something to say on this? You don't have to listen to them, you don't have to do what they want, but you got to afford them that opportunity. Does Altitude have a standard virtual meetings policy template? We can certainly prepare virtual meeting policies. We don't have a specific template that we give out. If you decide to have a virtual meeting, how do you handle homeowners that do not have access to the internet or don't have the PC? So that, I think, is what we talked about earlier. And again, in that case, I would say hopefully they can use a telephone, because I would think they have a telephone. What is protocol for a special meeting called by 20% of the owners to have a conference call and not a virtual meeting because they're in their 70s and 80s and are not comfortable with technology? Also, can the board have authority to decide not to have virtual meeting until COVID lifts, as they prefer in-person meetings because the board and owners are not comfortable with virtual? So that's a couple questions. So if you've got, technically Kiowa says, homeowners, if homeowners representing 20% request a special meeting, you must call it. So if they're doing a telephone conference, then the question becomes, is it still considered a gathering? Is it still technically a meeting? Or is it not a meeting? Well, we looked at the Nonprofit Act and said if you can hear everyone, then it's technically going to be a meeting. So I think you can still do it via conference call, but I think it's going to be really difficult to run, especially if you have a lot of people on that call. If you decide to postpone your meetings, so here's the thing. The board has a fiduciary obligation to run the corporation, the HOA. So how are you going to run it without meetings? If you mean no homeowner meetings, that's one thing. If you mean no board meetings, that's a whole other thing. So I think to the extent that the community can continue to function and the corporation can continue to run and property values are kept up and, the board is still doing everything it's required to do, I really don't have a problem postponing like the annual meeting. However, at some point, there's going to have to be a decision made because we don't know how long this is going to go on. At first, we were all like, it's a month, it's 2 months, it's still summer, but it's still going on. And so you can't indefinitely not have a meeting. So you're going to have to figure out how long you're willing to postpone it and whether or not, if it's just an election, whether or not you should just conduct the election by a mail ballot and get it over with and then wait till next year. So definitely a lot of things to consider, and definitely talk with your legal counsel for the association to make decisions on that. I have a board that wants meetings recorded and send it to the owners that were not able to attend. Is this okay to do? I mean, it's a board decision. We generally don't recommend recording meetings. And if you were following our legislative process during the year, there at one point was in one of the bills that is no longer around, but there was some language about prohibiting associations from telling homeowners they can't record meetings, but that's not on the table right now, but it might be next year. But it's up to the board. I don't like recording meetings because it's easy to take things out of context. I mean, really, that's why we take meeting minutes. That is the official corporate record of what transpired at a meeting. However, it's not illegal. the board wants to do it, they can do it. Nobody using this one, or do they just show up? Sorry, that looks like a partial question. Let me go up one because we're running out of time. This is a small community. Okay, here we go. Could the association allow attendance at the place? Places limit the amount of in-person attending along with virtual option. This is a small community where the majority of the owners are over 75. Nobody is using this one, or they just show up. So again, you can do a hybrid. I've seen it done, like where some people came, attended by virtual. Some people showed up in person physically. It didn't work very well because because unfortunately the people who were virtual couldn't hear what the people in the room were saying. It was just this big old convoluted mess. So, I mean, yes, legally you can do it, but don't be surprised if it doesn't turn out exactly the way you want it to. So we have a few more questions. I'm not going to go over unlimited 3101, so I guess I did go over. But for the ones I didn't answer, my email's right on this slide. Please feel free, just email me directly and I can respond to you that way for any of your questions. So thank you so much, guys. I appreciate you all being on the webinar, and feel free to email me with anything that maybe wasn't addressed. Thank you.